Bienvenido, AP. Yeah, that's right. Getting international on you a little bit. Hey, like that, Ma. How's that going to fit into your little compilation video? All right, anyway, now, really quick, that's probably going to end up in there too, that noise I just made. Now, some of y'all are going to be like, wow, just talking a little bit slower. It's like 7:05 in the morning. I'm doing this before y'all ever even get to school. And I know that people like Emily O'Donnell are not going to be upset that I'm speaking a little slower, right? So, and Dion, I know, will not be upset with it either. But what we're getting into now, we're going to be getting into the absolutism and constitutionalism phase of Europe, right? We are finally, Jill Kenny, finally going to start just doing this in time. Just trotting forward for once, right? So, for the last couple units, we've been going like forward and then jumping back and then forward and then jumping back and then forward and then jumping back, which we'll still do a little bit of. We're just not going to do it as much anymore, all right? Because we finally get to start progressing forward and talk about the massive like cause and effect and societal ripples that actually go through most of European history. That leads you to modern day, right? Now, what we need to do though, before we actually get started with all that, I would like to kind of just take a big breath and just talk about like, what's the state of Europe in about, like, let's say the late 1500s? All right, so state of Europe in the late 1500s, okay? So this is really, really important, and this is not actually in my absolutism and constitutionalism phase, but it's really, really important to talk about, like, continuity and change over time, right? Because that's actually one of the biggest themes of the entire AP course. They want to know, can you tell that things have stayed the same or have they drastically changed since the beginning of European history, right? Well, let's go ahead and just kind of take a glance at this whole thing. Let's look at the situation, right? So first and foremost, let's go all the way back to the Renaissance, right? Humanism is on the rise. Humanism is big. Humanism booms is what we're going to say, right? So, not to mention the fact as well, following that period, economies on the rise, right, are on the rise in Europe. You've got things like family firms growing. The Habsburgs are taking over. We also have, like, monarchs. Power is growing. Power is growing. A couple other big things that we have going on as well. Going into, like, the Reformation, for example. So we had, like, humanism is booming, right, from the Renaissance. The economies are back on the rise again. Monarchs are beginning to consolidate their power, right, which is just the earliest phase, getting into all this absolutism stuff. Now, going forward, that's from the, like, I'm going to put Ren right there. That's from the Renaissance, right? And then we moved over to when we were talking about the Reformation, right, which is going on at the exact same time. The big thing about the Reformation, though, is, like, the Catholic Church power has been checked. We now have Lutherans are accepted, all right? Lutherans accepted, sort of, anyway. I'm going to put sort of, all right? Anyway, now, so Lutherans are being accepted, sort of. We also have this big thing as well. Calvinism? Not so much, all right? So anyway, as in for two reasons why I put that. Number one, it's not as accepted nearly as much, and then also the fact of they're not backed as heavily by as many governments, right? So Calvinists own about like 10% of England by this point, and then about 20% to 30% maybe of France. So they're there, but they're just not as big as, like, let's say your Lutherans or something like that, right? So there we go. And then we had our big other phase that happened as well, is the exploration phase. And the biggest thing about the exploration phase is Spain got the money, all right? And after we talk about this in class today, they have a little bit too much money. So Spain has the money, all right? The global economy is booming, okay? So global economy is huge. But then we also have the negativity of the fact that natives are destroyed. Slavery is at a high. Right? So, looking at this entire thing, though, as you can tell, a lot of things have changed, right? Before the Renaissance, humanism wasn't a thing. Like, non-secularism was the only way to learn, right? Before humanism, everyone believed that, oh, the only thing you need to learn about is, like, Jesus and his life and his teachings, right? So, which is not, like, completely wrong. Jesus is a good guy. Also, before the Renaissance, economies were in the toilet, right? They were terrible. the monarchs were competing for as much power as they could get, but the nobles had more power before the Renaissance, right? So a huge amount of change right there. Before the Reformation, Catholic Church power was supreme, but now it has been checked, right? Lutherans are now accepted, sort of, so we now have new denominations. We have new denominations. New denominations. Is this on the screen? New denominations, right? We have all kinds of amazing things happening. So a massive amount of power right there has been changed. But also then you had like the Counter-Reformation. So, this is another big thing about the Reformation. One last little thing. Drop that in there. Catholicism is spreading. All right, so because we had the new orders like the Jesuits actually trying to take it to the New World areas and trying to like actually put it on to people. A lot of that actually relates back to this as well. Exploration relates into the fact that Catholicism is spreading. Lutherans are being accepted mainly in Germany. Calvinism not so much. So that's going to lead to a big issue coming up soon. Spain got the money, global economy, natives are destroyed, slavery at an all-time high. So those are our big things at the state of Europe, right? So, but now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the more like little bit like kind of smaller stuff, right? And let's begin with, we've just been talking this entire time about basically the wealthy, right? How has the wealthy's lives been changed? Put this as your title for your next section of notes, right? Or we're not taking a test on the exploration stuff. You've been learning it for most of your entire childhood career, right? So, but the big thing is, going into this, though, when you talk about absolutism and constitutionalism, one of the best things you can actually do is kind of rewind back for a moment. And let's talk about the little people, right? So let's talk about peasant life, right? Because notice that everything right here, like if humanism is huge, the elite are studying humanism. The peasants aren't. The economies are on the rise from the backs of the peasants. Monarchs are gaining power, but the peasants aren't, right? So blah, 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 blah. This all relates back to the ruling powers of Europe, right? These are all like, right? So these are all there actually gaining power from all of this, right? You can actually draw that little crown in there. So big time power, like we're actually growing for the monarchs due to all these trends, right? But let's talk about the peasants real fast. So most citizens in Europe actually still live in the countryside, right? So they mostly still live in rural areas, or like slightly outside of cities, right? Most of your wealthy during this time period in the late 1500s, okay, are actually still living outside of the city, farming what they need to, and also probably still working for a wealthy lord, right? So the urban dwellers are typically wealthy or extremely poor, right? Like extremely poor. You have some small industries on the rise in 1500s Europe. Print shops, manufacturing, like where they can find it. But due to the exploration as well as the Renaissance and the Reformation bringing more power to monarchs and things like that, a lot of these things that they want to manufacture are being made at other places, like in the East, right? So they're actually bringing those items in. So life didn't get much better for peasants. Most poor live on the edge of subsistence, which means there are days that they don't eat. The output of industry is very, very low, right? So like I just said, if you're like looking for products, a lot of times they're coming from the East, right? So this is going to be leading to a huge amount of strife. So the gap between the peasants and the wealthy is just continuing to what? Just grow all the time. You got the poor over here, and you got the wealthy over here, right? So it's actually growing. And we talked about how like the Renaissance actually started a big phase of that, like the gap between the educated and the uneducated. But the big problem was like that basically just means the wealthy and the poor because education is all about access, right? So, but the big thing is, going forward, this is all also Western Europe, right? We have very rarely talked about Eastern Europe, but let's get into this, right? So there's also going to be like a return to serfdom, not in the West, but in the East, right? So in the Western bloc, in the Western parts of Europe, the Black Death led to a decrease in serfdom, right? So in areas like France, the Holy Roman Empire, England, Spain, serfdom actually goes on the decline due to the heavy amount of death ushered in by this disease, right, during the Middle Ages, right? So that's in the Middle Ages. And Joe Kinney right now is probably like, I thought you said we were going forward. Look, I'm sorry. You got to jump around a little bit, all right? So, but the big thing is going forward, there was a big decline in serfdom. But not in the East, there's not. All right, anyway, so in the 1500s, Eastern Europe is actually going to see a return to serfdom. Now, a lot of this is a power grab, right? Because whenever we've been talking about the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Exploration, we're constantly talking about countries in Western Europe. So the Eastern Europeans, for example, let's give you a slight list of any Eastern European countries that you can jot down on there. I don't really need to write it down up here, I don't think. Your Eastern European countries that are beginning to grow or try to find ways to actually become those labor-intensive areas where they're trying to grow their wealth from grassroots programs are people like the Prussians, the Lithuanians, the Austrians in the Hungarian area, right? So Hungary. Not Russia so much yet. The Mongols just left. All right, so, but it's mainly all your eastern countries, right? Your larger eastern countries. So Prussian lords were actually allowed to hunt peasants down like they were slaves, right? If a serf broke contract in the 1500s Eastern Europe, they were allowed to be hunted down and legally prosecuted. Local lords were actually appointed as judges. That seems a little biased, right? The prosecutor and the jailer, right? So the guy that actually writes the contract that you were forced to work for is now considered the local magistrate as well. All right, so it's getting rough. It's getting rough. Now, the big thing is, though, that is the only way the Eastern Bloc could actually aid its economic growth. Because look at the Western Bloc. They're kicking butt right now, right? Renaissance is bringing them mad money. Exploration is making mad money. The Reformation was a little bit of an issue, but that really hurt the pocket of the Catholic Church, right? So not so much the lords or the kings or people like that. So then things are going to spiral slightly out of control, right? And then we're going to meet this guy, Gustavus Adolphus, right? So, and then also this tool down here, Cardinal Richelieu. Everything really, really hits the fan when the 1600s roll around because of this more than anything else, right? The Reformation just didn't quite do the job that everybody wanted it to, right? So due to the fact that the Peace of Augsburg, right? The Peace of Augsburg, as well as, the Peace of Augsburg, right? The Peace of Augsburg was a temporary solution, right? Somebody tell me really quick again, what was the outline of the Lutheran faith? Anybody remember? Good job, Michaela. That's right. The Confession of Augsburg was the outline of the Lutheran faith, issued by the Lutherans to Charles V at an imperial diet so he could understand what their faith was, and he sanctioned it, right? Well, the Peace of Augsburg also brought in a big problem with it as well, right? So the Peace of Augsburg was a temporary solution due to the fact that it kind of redefined the outlines of the Holy Roman Empire, right? Jot that down really quick. Redefined the outlines of the Holy Roman Empire. But it also ushered in two problems, right? Two problems. Number one, Calvinism not included. Ooh, that's a problem, right? So Calvinism was not included in the Peace of Augsburg, right? Just Lutheranism was included in the Peace of Augsburg. That's why I got Calvinism not so much, right? So because they actually weren't even technically accepted yet. The second problem is it incorporated the idea that the people that live beneath a lord must actually be their lord's faith. So hypothetically, if you had a Catholic lord, his people are expected to be Catholic, right? If you had a Catholic king, his people are expected to be Catholic. But what happens, though, if in Prussia, which is where all of this started, there and actually in the Czech Republic, well, it's actually in the Holy Roman Empire, period. So anyway, in the Holy Roman Empire, there were different kings and princes for different areas. And this all actually started when the king of Prague, right, the king of the Bohemia was a Catholic, but everyone beneath him was a Lutheran, right? So the entire thing started when he began to force them to try and take on Catholic ideals. Then they threw him out a window. It's called the Second Defenestration of Prague. That's right, Defenestration, D-E-F, Defenestration is the actual act of throwing someone out a window. So I have personally wanted to defenestrate like so many items in my classroom. People, not always, but sometimes. All right, so Denny. Now, anyway, really, really quick, though. It all starts with that because the Holy Roman Empire was just a loose confederation with an appointed emperor, right? So all these different kings were picking different religions and making everybody mad. And so in the Second Defenestration of Prague, they hucked the German prince out a window. He lived, though. Fun story. He actually landed in a pile of horse crap and didn't die. All right, so now all the Catholics were like, angels swooped in and saved him. And then all the people from Bohemia were like, no, he landed in horse crap and that's why he didn't die. All right, so, but it ended up breaking out into the 30 Years' War, right? So, and it's going to become the Protestant Union versus the Catholic League. All right, so big thing is going to happen, though. I just need you to jot this down, and then we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty parts of it in class because I want to make sure that we can completely understand this, or we might like pick it up in the next flip. It's going to have 4 main phases, right? It's going to be the Bohemian Phase, right? Because these Protestant unions and these Catholic leagues are going to go to war with one another. The Bohemian Phase is the Protestants versus the Catholic leagues, 1618 to 1620, right? So the Danish Phase was from 1625 to 1629. It's when the Protestant king of Denmark actually went against the Catholics, and all Catholic lands are going to be restored after this thing called the Edict of Restitution. But here's the big crazy thing that happens. Midway through the Swedish phase and then the French phase, the 30 Years' War stops being about religion. It becomes completely political. All right, so you had the Swedish king right over here, Gustavus Adolphus, all around BA, and also the man, Protestant leader, begins to actually lash out against the French, when the French then also, under Cardinal Richelieu, begin to try and make allies with Protestants from areas like Switzerland to try and hold off the Swedish phase of this entire war. So France begins to pivot and mess up everything for everybody, and yet another war, thanks guys, and actually begins to push against the Protestants and makes allies with other Protestants. So this thing actually becomes completely political. The French saw an opportunity to make money in the Swedish phase, so they actually began to use it to abuse their political power, right? So, and then in the French phase, it ends up just going Richelieu versus Habsburg, and Habsburgs are Catholic, and so is Cardinal Richelieu as well, right? And that is Cardinal Richelieu. He's the bad guy from the Three Musketeers movie. And if you haven't seen the Three Musketeers movie made by Disney, you're a bad person. But on that note, we're going to stop here, and we're going to pick it up in the next flip, okay? So I'm going to get into some more nitty-gritty details of the 30 Years' War, so leave a little bit of space below it. That's just kind of a loose outline of how it works, right? But yeah, so that's it, all right? So I hope y'all have a good evening. We talked about a lot of stuff in this flip. I hope it's not too long, but sorry, I'm not sorry if it is. All right, so y'all have a good evening. I'll see y'all tomorrow.